The whispers rose like a flock of startled birds as Harriet Decker was led onto the auction block in the sweltering heat of a July afternoon in Elko, Nevada, 1876. The auctioneer's voice cut through the murmurs, his words slicing into her dignity with each syllable. "Next up, gentlemen. A fine woman for housekeeping, cooking, and whatever else you might fancy. Strong as an ox, though carrying more weight than most prefer. Starting bid at $15. Harriet stood with her chin raised, refusing to let her tears fall despite the humiliation burning through her. 22 years old, and being sold like livestock because her former employer, the recently deceased Mrs. Wilkinson, had left no provisions for her in her will. The old woman's son had wasted no time declaring Harriet's contract transferable and putting her up for auction, claiming no man would want a woman of her size as a wife, so she might as well be sold for labor. $15 for this one. Anyone. She can cook like nobody's business, I'm told. $15, the crowd shuffled uncomfortably. Some men snickered, others looked away. Harriet felt her resolve cracking as the auctioneer's voice grew more desperate. Fine then. $10. Surely someone can use a strong back around their property. $50. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep and steady. The crowd parted as a tall man in a dusty black hat stepped forward. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his eyes a startling blue against his tanned skin. Harriet had never seen him before. 50? Did I hear 50? The auctioneer couldn't hide his surprise. You heard me. The man stepped closer, his spurs jingling with each purposeful stride. $50 for the lady. Whispers erupted again. No domestic servant, especially one of Harriet's size, ever fetched such a sum. $50 going once, the auctioneer stammered. $50 going twice. Sold. To Mr. Caleb Grayson, the man supplied, already counting out the money from a leather pouch. He approached the platform and extended his hand to Harriet. You're coming home. Harriet stared at his outstretched hand, uncertain. Home? What did he mean by that? Come on now, he said, his voice softer, meant only for her ears. I've got a wagon waiting. With no choice but to follow, Harriet placed her trembling hand in his and stepped down from the auction block. Her single trunk of belongings was already being loaded onto a wagon at the edge of the town square. Mr. Grayson. She finally found her voice as they walked away from the crowd. I don't understand. Why would you pay so much for a housekeeper? Caleb Grayson didn't answer immediately. He helped her up onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. I didn't buy a housekeeper, Miss Decker, he said, flicking the reins to set the horses in motion. I bought your freedom. What you do with it is entirely up to you. Harriet's breath caught in her throat. My freedom. That's right. His eyes remained fixed on the road ahead as they left town behind. My ranch is a half-day's ride from here. You can stay and work for fair wages if you like, or I can take you to the stagecoach station tomorrow, and you can go wherever you please with the money you earn. Harriet studied his profile, searching for some hidden motive but finding none. Why would you do that for a stranger? Caleb glanced at her briefly, then returned his gaze to the road. Because no person should be sold like property. I've seen enough of that in my lifetime. As they rode in silence, Harriet noticed the tightness around his mouth, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped the reins. There was a story there, she realized. A painful one. Thank you, she whispered, the words inadequate for the enormity of what he'd done. Caleb nodded but said nothing more as the wagon rumbled northward, away from Elko and into the vast, open country beyond. The sun was beginning its descent when they arrived at Grayson Ranch. It wasn't the largest property Harriet had seen, but it was well maintained, with a sturdy two-story house, a barn, and several outbuildings arranged in a neat cluster. A corral held several horses that lifted their heads at the wagon's approach. "It's not much," Caleb said as he pulled the team to a halt, "but it's peaceful." "It's beautiful," Harriet replied honestly. After the noise and filth of town, the ranch with its backdrop of distant mountains seemed like paradise. An older woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned in a neat bun, and she had the same startling blue eyes as Caleb. "You're back earlier than I expected," she called, then stopped short when she noticed Harriet. "Oh, you've brought company. Ma, this is Miss Harriet Decker. She'll be staying with us for a while." Caleb jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Harriet. "Miss Decker, this is my mother, Elaine Grayson." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Grayson," Harriet said, suddenly aware of her rumpled dress and disheveled appearance after the auction and the long ride. Elaine Grayson's eyes were kind but curious as they swept over Harriet. "Well, you're just in time for supper. Come in and get washed up." Inside, the house was simply furnished but comfortable, with handmade quilts and curtains adding touches of color. Harriet was shown to a small but clean bedroom off the kitchen. "This was our housekeeper's room," Elaine explained. "Martha got married last month and moved to her husband's farm near the California border." "Is that why your son purchased my contract?" Harriet asked carefully. Elaine's expression became troubled. "Purchased your—" Caleb didn't say anything about. She stopped herself. "You rest a bit. Supper will be ready soon, and maybe then we can sort this out." Left alone, Harriet sat on the narrow bed and tried to make sense of her situation. One moment she had been standing on an auction block, certain her life was over, and the next she was in a stranger's home being treated with unexpected kindness. She washed her face and hands in the basin provided, then unpinned and rebraided her thick brown hair. Her reflection in the small mirror showed tired eyes, but the panic that had gripped her earlier was receding. Whatever Caleb Grayson's reasons for bringing her here, at least he and his mother seemed decent people. At supper, Harriet learned that the Graysons ran a modest but successful horse breeding operation. They raised quarter horses prized for their speed and endurance, selling to ranchers and occasionally to the cavalry. "It was my husband's passion," Elaine explained as they ate a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and biscuits. "After he passed 5 years ago, Caleb took over and has done remarkably well." Caleb, who had been quiet throughout the meal, finally addressed what must have been on his mother's mind. "Miss Decker was being auctioned off in town today. Her employment contract was being sold after her previous employer died." Elaine's spoon clattered against her bowl. "Auctioned, like a slave. But it's not legal strictly speaking," Caleb agreed, "but it happens. Especially to women without family or means. Mrs. Wilkinson hired me from the orphanage in Sacramento when I was 16, Harriet explained. "She was strict but fair. I never thought when she died that her son would." She couldn't finish the sentence. "That's barbaric," Elaine declared, reaching across the table to pat Harriet's hand. "Well, you're safe now." After supper, Caleb excused himself to check on a mare about to foal, leaving Harriet to help Elaine with the dishes. "My son has always had a strong sense of justice," Elaine said as they worked. "Even as a boy, he couldn't stand to see anything suffering. He said I could stay and work for wages or leave tomorrow," Harriet said. "I'm a good cook and housekeeper. I can earn my keep." Elaine studied her thoughtfully. "We do need help around here, that's true, but you shouldn't feel obligated." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Harriet admitted, "and I'd rather work here than be sent to another household where I might face the same situation again." "Then it's settled." Elaine smiled. You'll stay as long as you wish as our housekeeper, properly paid. Though I warn you, Caleb works from sunup to sundown, and he expects the same from everyone on the ranch. I'm no stranger to hard work, Mrs. Grayson. Call me Elaine, dear. And I don't doubt your work ethic for a moment. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Harriet listened to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. A dog barked in the distance. A horse nickered. Wind rustled through the cottonwood trees outside her window, for the first time since Mrs. Wilkinson's death. Harriet allowed herself to hope that perhaps things might turn out all right after all. The next few days established a routine. Harriet rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Caleb and the two ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. After Caleb rode out to check the horses in the north pasture, she helped Elaine with household chores, learning the rhythms of the ranch. Caleb remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite but spoke little, often lost in thought. Harriet found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, trying to understand the man who had saved her from a terrible fate. On her fourth day at the ranch, Harriet was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when Caleb rode in, leading a magnificent black stallion that pranced and tossed its head. "This one's giving me trouble," he called to her, swinging down from his own mount. "Won't let anyone near him except me, and even then he's ornery." "He's beautiful," Harriet said, admiring the stallion's glossy coat and proud bearing. "Beautiful and knows it." Caleb chuckled. "His name's Midnight, best bloodlines in the territory, but with a temper to match." As if understanding he was being discussed, Midnight snorted and pawed at the ground. "May I?" Harriet asked, taking a step closer. Caleb looked doubtful. "He's not good with strangers." "I've always had a way with difficult animals." At Mrs. Wilkinson's, she had tamed the most ferocious barn cats and coaxed the most stubborn mules. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "Just be careful, he bites." Harriet approached slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice. "Hello there, handsome. Aren't you a magnificent creature?" "Yes, you are." To Caleb's visible astonishment, Midnight stopped pawing and pricked his ears forward, watching Harriet with interest. She continued murmuring to him as she extended her hand, palm up. The stallion stretched his neck, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. "That's it." "I won't hurt you," Harriet promised, not moving any closer. After a tense moment, Midnight took a step toward her and allowed her to touch his velvety nose. "I'll be damned," Caleb breathed. "He's never done that before." Harriet smiled, stroking the horse's face gently. "He just needs patience. And maybe a few apple slices." "You like horses?" Caleb asked, coming to stand beside her. "I've never had much chance to be around them," Harriet admitted. "Mrs. Wilkinson kept a carriage horse, but he was old and gentle, nothing like this fellow. Would you like to learn to ride?" The question caught her off guard. "Me? Oh, I don't know if I could." "Anyone can learn," Caleb said. "And everyone on a ranch should know how to sit a horse. We've got a gentle mare that would suit a beginner." Harriet hesitated, thinking of her size. "I'm not exactly built like a horsewoman." Caleb's eyes met hers directly. "The horse won't mind, neither do I." Something in his steady gaze made Harriet's cheeks warm. She looked away, back to Midnight, who was now contentedly letting her scratch under his chin. "All right," she agreed. "I'd like that. Tomorrow, then." After the morning chores. And so it was that Harriet found herself the next day standing nervously beside a chestnut mare named Copper, while Caleb adjusted the stirrups on an old side saddle. "This was my mother's when she was younger," he explained. "She doesn't ride much these days, says it hurts her joints." "Are you sure the horse can? Copper's strong," Caleb assured her, anticipating her concern. "She's carried men twice your size without complaint." Harriet nodded, swallowing her embarrassment. Her weight had always been a sensitive subject. At the orphanage, she'd been teased mercilessly, and Mrs. Wilkinson had often commented that Harriet would never find a husband if she didn't slim down. Caleb showed her how to mount using a small wooden block, then how to hold the reins and sit properly in the saddle. His instructions were patient and clear, and soon Harriet found herself moving slowly around the corral, Caleb walking beside her with a lead rope. "You're a natural," he said after a while, and though Harriet didn't believe it, his approval made her sit a little straighter. That evening at supper, Harriet's muscles ached, but she felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. "Caleb says you've taken to riding like a duck to water," Elaine remarked, passing a plate of cornbread. "I wouldn't go that far," Harriet laughed, "but it was exhilarating." "She's got a way with horses," Caleb said. "Midnight actually let her touch him. Wouldn't even let Jackson or Pete near him, and they've been handling horses all their lives." Elaine raised her eyebrows. "Is that so?" "Well, it seems you found a special talent, Harriet." Later, as Harriet prepared to turn in for the night, she heard raised voices from the front porch. Curious, she moved quietly to the kitchen window and peered out. Caleb was standing with another man, one of the hands, Pete Wilson. "I'm telling you, there's trouble brewing," Pete was saying. "Farley's been making threats all over town about how you cheated him on that last sale." "I paid fair market price for those mares," Caleb replied, his voice tight. "If Farley was too drunk to know what he was agreeing to, that's his problem." "Well, his problem might become yours. He's been gathering some rough men around him lately. Just watch your back, that's all I'm saying." "Thanks for the warning, Pete. I'll keep an eye out." After Pete had gone, Caleb remained on the porch, staring out into the darkness. The set of his shoulders spoke of tension that hadn't been there during their riding lesson. Harriet retreated from the window, troubled by what she'd overheard. The next morning, Caleb was gone before breakfast, leaving word with Elaine that he'd ridden to a neighboring ranch to look at a colt for sale. Harriet went about her chores, trying not to worry about the conversation she'd overheard. Around midday, the sound of approaching horses brought her to the front door. 3 riders were coming up the drive, none of them Caleb. The man in front was heavyset, with a scraggly beard and small, mean eyes. The other 2 looked like the sort of men who could be hired for any dirty work that needed doing. Elaine came to stand beside her. "That's Vernon Farley," she said quietly. "No good can come of this visit." "Should I fetch the rifle?" Harriet asked, surprising herself with the offer. Elaine shook her head. "Not yet. Let's see what he wants first." The men dismounted and Farley strutted up to the porch like he owned the place. "Mrs. Grayson," he said with a mockery of politeness. "Is that boy of yours around?" "My son is away on business, Mr. Farley," Elaine replied coolly. "What can I do for you?" Farley spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt. "You can tell him I want my horses back, or the difference between what he paid and what they're actually worth." "Those horses were sold fair and square," Elaine said. "If you have complaints about the transaction, you can take it up with Caleb when he returns." Farley's face darkened. "I'm not leaving empty-handed, woman." His gaze shifted to Harriet, and a nasty smile spread across his face. "Well, well, what have we here?" "Caleb Grayson's taste in women is as poor as his business ethics." Harriet felt her cheeks burn, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "You watch your tongue in my house," Elaine snapped. "Miss Decker is our housekeeper and a lady deserving of respect." Farley laughed. "A lady?" "I was at that auction, Mrs. Grayson. I know exactly what she is." "You know nothing about me," Harriet said, finding her voice at last. "I know Grayson overpaid," Farley sneered. "Though I suppose even at $50 you're cheaper than those horses he cheated me on." One of Farley's men sniggered, but the other looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Get off our property," Elaine ordered, her hand moving to the pocket of her apron where Harriet knew she kept a small pistol. "Or what?" Farley took a step closer. "You'll shoot us all, old woman." "I don't think so." The sound of a rifle being cocked froze everyone in place. Pete Wilson stood at the corner of the house, his weapon aimed steadily at Farley's chest. "The lady asked you to leave, Farley." Farley's face contorted with rage, but he wasn't fool enough to test Pete's resolve. "This isn't over," he spat. "Tell Grayson I'll be seeing him soon." The three men mounted up and rode off, Farley turning in his saddle to give them one last menacing glare before they disappeared down the drive. "Are you ladies all right?" Pete asked, lowering his rifle. "Thanks to you," Elaine said, visibly shaken. "I'd better send Jackson to find Caleb and warn him." As Pete went to saddle a horse for Jackson, Harriet helped Elaine inside and made her a cup of tea. "Does this happen often?" Harriet asked, concerned by the older woman's pallor. "There have been disputes before," Elaine admitted, "but Farley's particularly vindictive and dangerous when he's been drinking, which is most of the time these days." Harriet thought of the cruel gleam in Farley's eyes when he'd mentioned the auction. "He recognized me." "Don't you worry about that," Elaine said firmly. "What happened in Elko stays in Elko. You're part of this household now." The words warmed Harriet more than she could express. Part of a household. It was something she hadn't felt since before her parents died of influenza when she was just 6 years old. Caleb returned late that evening, his expression grim after hearing about Farley's visit. "I should never have left you alone," he said as they sat around the kitchen table. "We weren't alone," Elaine reminded him. "Pete was here, thank goodness." "Still." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Harriet had come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "Farley's getting bolder. First threatening me in town, now coming to the ranch." "What exactly happened with these horses?" Harriet asked. Caleb sighed. "Farley needed money fast gambling debts from what I heard. He offered to sell me 3 of his brood mares, good bloodlines but not as good as he claimed. I paid him $800 for the lot, which was fair given their age and condition. A week later, he started telling anyone who'd listen that they were worth twice that, and I'd swindled him." "And had you?" Harriet asked bluntly. Instead of being offended, Caleb smiled slightly. "No, Miss Decker. I paid what they were worth, not a penny less." "Then why is he so fixated on you?" "Because he needs someone to blame for his own poor decisions," Elaine interjected. "And Caleb's an easier target than his own reflection." Caleb nodded. "That, and he's always resented our family. My father refused to lend him money years ago, knowing he'd never see it again. Vernon Farley has a long memory for grudges." That night, Caleb insisted on taking the first watch, sitting on the porch with his rifle across his knees. Harriet brought him a blanket as the evening air grew chilly. "You should get some sleep," he told her, though he accepted the blanket with a grateful nod. "I'm too restless," Harriet admitted, sitting down on the step beside him. "Today brought back memories of the auction." "Things I'd rather forget." Caleb was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." "Why did you do it?" Harriet asked the question that had been on her mind since that day. "Why pay so much for a stranger?" The moonlight cast Caleb's face in silver and shadow as he seemed to consider his answer. "My mother told you my father passed 5 years ago. What she didn't tell you is that he was killed trying to stop a man from beating a young Chinese woman on the streets of Virginia City. He couldn't stand by and watch an injustice, even when it had nothing to do with him." "A noble man," Harriet said softly. "Yes." Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "I was there, saw it happen, couldn't do anything to stop it." Harriet's heart ached for him. "You were just a boy." "I was 19. Old enough to help, but I froze. By the time I recovered my wits, it was too late." He paused. "When I saw you on that auction block, with that auctioneer treating you like property and those men looking at you with contempt." I heard my father's voice as clear as day saying, "Son, do something." Tears pricked at Harriet's eyes. "Thank you for listening to him." Caleb turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense in the moonlight. "I've never regretted it, not for a moment." Something shifted between them in that quiet exchange, a deeper understanding, perhaps, or the first tentative roots of something more. Harriet felt it like a physical warmth in her chest, spreading outward. The moment was broken by the distant howl of a coyote. Caleb straightened, alert again. "You should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow might be a long day." Harriet nodded and stood, oddly reluctant to leave. "Good night, Mr. Grayson." "Caleb," he corrected gently. "After everything, I think you can call me Caleb." "Good night, Caleb," she amended, the name feeling right on her lips. "Good night, Harriet." As she returned to her room, Harriet realized it was the first time he had used her given name as well. The next day passed without incident, though everyone remained vigilant. Caleb spent most of it working with Midnight in the corral, and Harriet found excuses to watch whenever her chores allowed. There was something mesmerizing about the way man and horse communicated, a dance of wills that gradually transformed into mutual respect. In the evening, after supper was cleared away, Caleb surprised Harriet by asking if she'd like to continue her riding lessons. "Now?" she asked, glancing out the window at the setting sun. "The moon's nearly full," he replied. "Plenty of light, and it's cooler now." Elaine shooed them out, saying she'd take care of the dishes. "Go on. You young people enjoy the evening." Outside, with Copper saddled and waiting, Harriet felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with the horse. Caleb helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Today we'll try without the lead rope," he said, stepping back. "Just walk her around the corral a few times to get comfortable." Harriet did as instructed, finding her balance more easily than the day before. Copper responded to the slightest pressure of the reins, seeming to anticipate Harriet's intentions. "You're doing well," Caleb called. "Want to try a trot?" By the time they finished the lesson, Harriet was exhilarated, her earlier fears forgotten. She could trot confidently now and was eager to learn more. "Tomorrow we'll go for a proper ride," Caleb promised as he helped her dismount. "There's a creek not far from here that's pretty at sunset." His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Harriet found herself looking up into his face, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I'd like that," she said softly. Caleb cleared his throat and stepped back. "Good, that's good." As they walked back to the house, Caleb pointed out constellations appearing in the darkening sky, his knowledge of the stars surprising Harriet. "My father taught me," he explained when she commented on it. "Said a man could never be truly lost if he could read the heavens." "A wise man," Harriet said. "He would have liked you." Caleb's voice was quiet, almost wistful. "He always said character mattered more than appearances." The words could have stung, a reminder of how her appearance set her apart, but somehow coming from Caleb, they felt like a compliment. He saw beyond her size to who she was beneath. "I think I would have liked him too," she replied. The promised ride to the creek happened 2 days later. Caleb had business in town first, returning with supplies and news. "Farley's been quieter," he reported as they saddled the horses. "The sheriff had a word with him about making threats. Doesn't mean he's given up, but at least he's not being so public about it." Harriet mounted Copper with growing confidence, and they set off at a walk, Caleb riding Midnight, who had proven surprisingly accepting of Harriet's presence. The landscape opened before them, rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and juniper, backed by distant mountains. The air was filled with the scent of sun-warmed earth and the sweet fragrance of wildflowers that grew in surprising abundance along the trail. "It's beautiful," Harriet breathed, taking it all in. "I never imagined Nevada could be so lovely. Most people only see the mining towns or the desert, Caleb replied. They miss all this. He gestured to the panorama around them. The creek was just as Caleb had described, a ribbon of silver water flowing between banks lush with vegetation. They dismounted in a small clearing, and Caleb spread a blanket on the grass. From his saddlebag, he produced a simple picnic: bread, cheese, apples, and a jug of sweet cider. Not fancy, but filling, he said with a slightly self-conscious smile. It's perfect, Harriet assured him, settling on the blanket. They ate in companionable silence, watching the play of light on the water as the sun began its descent. Birds called to each other in the trees, and occasionally a fish jumped, creating ripples in the creek's smooth surface. I never thanked you properly, Harriet said after a while. For what you did in Elko, for my freedom. Caleb looked embarrassed. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. Harriet met his gaze steadily. You changed my life that day. And you've changed things at the ranch, he countered. Ma smiles more since you came. The house feels warmer somehow. Harriet felt her cheeks flush with pleasure at the compliment. I've been happy there. Happier than I expected to be again. Caleb seemed about to say something more when the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Both turned to see Pete Wilson riding toward them at a gallop. Caleb, Pete called as he reined in his horse. Trouble at the ranch. Farley and his men are there, demanding to see you. They've got Jackson tied up and your ma's holding them off with the shotgun, but it's bad. Caleb was on his feet instantly. Harriet, ride with Pete. He'll get you somewhere safe. I'm not leaving, Harriet protested. Not when your mother needs help. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when Farley brought up the auction, Harriet countered, already moving toward Copper. I'm coming with you. There was no time to argue. Caleb gave a curt nod, and they were galloping back toward the ranch, pushing their horses as fast as they dared on the rough trail. They arrived to find 4 horses tethered outside the house. Through the open door, they could hear raised voices. Farley brought reinforcements, Pete muttered. One of them's his cousin Mason, mean as a rattlesnake, that one. Caleb dismounted and pulled his rifle from its scabbard. Pete, take the back door, I'll go in the front. Harriet, stay with the horses until it's safe. Harriet nodded, though she had no intention of remaining behind if things went badly. As the men crept toward the house, she scanned the yard and spotted a stout piece of wood beside the chopping block. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. From inside came the sound of Elaine's voice, surprisingly steady. I told you my son will be back tomorrow. If you have business with him, you can return then. We're done waiting, Mrs. Grayson. Farley's tone was menacing. We'll just take a few horses as interest on what he owes me, and maybe some other valuables to make the trip worthwhile. Over my dead body, Elaine replied. That can be arranged, old woman. Caleb chose that moment to step through the door, rifle raised. Touch my mother, Farley, and it'll be the last thing you do. Harriet couldn't see what was happening, but she heard the shuffle of feet, the click of weapons being cocked. Well, well, Farley drawled. Look who decided to join the party. Let Jackson go and get off my property, Caleb ordered. Not until I get what I'm owed, Farley insisted, plus interest for my troubles. You've been paid what your horses were worth, Caleb said. Not a cent more. There was a tense silence, then Farley's voice again, deceptively casual. You know, Grayson, accidents happen all the time on ranches. Fires start, horses go missing, people get hurt. Is that a threat? Just stating facts. This territory can be dangerous for a man on his own, and that mother of yours isn't getting any younger. Harriet had heard enough. Gripping her makeshift weapon, she moved quietly to the door and peered inside. Farley and 3 other men faced Caleb, who stood with his back to the door. Elaine was behind him, still holding the shotgun. Jackson was tied to a chair. a nasty bruise forming on his cheekbone. Pete was nowhere to be seen, but the back door stood slightly ajar. He must be waiting for the right moment. Farley's eyes flicked toward the doorway, and he spotted Harriet. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "Well, look who's here. Your auction prize, Grayson. Maybe we'll take her instead of the horses. I'm sure she'd fetch a good price in certain establishments." The crude suggestion made Harriet's blood boil. Without thinking, she stepped fully into the room. "Mr. Farley," she said clearly, "you are trespassing on private property and threatening its owners. The sheriff won't look kindly on that," Farley laughed. "And who's going to tell him? You." His gaze traveled over her dismissively. "No one would believe a woman like you over me." "Perhaps not," came a new voice from the back door. "But they'd believe me." Everyone turned to see Sheriff Thomas Davis standing beside Pete, his revolver drawn and pointed at Farley's men. "Davis," Farley snarled, "this is a private matter." "Breaking and entering, assault, threatening bodily harm, those sound like public matters to me," the sheriff replied. "Now, all of you drop your weapons. Nice and slow." For a moment it seemed Farley might resist. Then, with a muttered curse, he let his gun fall to the floor. His men followed suit. "This isn't over, Grayson," Farley hissed as the sheriff handcuffed him. "Actually, it is," Davis said. "You've had warnings before, Farley. This time you're going before the judge." After the sheriff had taken Farley and his men away and Jackson's bonds had been cut, the household gathered around the kitchen table, the tension slowly draining from the air. "How did the sheriff know to come?" Harriet asked. "I sent for him before I came looking for you," Pete explained. "Figured we might need the law on our side this time." "Quick thinking," Caleb acknowledged, pouring whiskey for the men and offering sherry to his mother and Harriet. "To all of you," he said, raising his glass, "for standing your ground." "What will happen to Farley?" Elaine asked. "The judge comes through next week," Pete said. "With his record, Farley might be looking at a few months in jail at least." Later, after Pete and Jackson had returned to the bunkhouse and Elaine had retired for the night, Caleb found Harriet on the porch, gazing up at the stars. "You were brave today," he said, leaning against the railing beside her. "Not really," Harriet demurred. "I was terrified." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid," Caleb said. "It means you act despite the fear." Harriet smiled at that. "Then I suppose we were all brave today." "Especially you." Caleb turned to face her fully. "When Farley threatened you, I've never felt rage like that before." The intensity in his voice made Harriet's heart skip a beat. "He was just trying to provoke you." He succeeded. Caleb's jaw tightened at the memory. "The thought of anyone hurting you." "Caleb," Harriet said softly, touched by his protectiveness. In the silver moonlight, his eyes searched her face. "I brought you here to give you freedom, Harriet. I never expected to." He hesitated. "To what?" she prompted when he didn't continue. "To care for you the way I do." The admission hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. "I care for you too," Harriet whispered, hardly daring to believe they were having this conversation. Caleb took her hand in his touch gentle yet sure. "I know it hasn't been long. And I know you came here thinking your choices were limited. I don't want you to feel obligated in any way." "I don't," Harriet assured him. "Whatever this is between us, it's not about obligation. It's about choice. My choice." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Caleb leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a tender, questioning kiss. Harriet responded with a tentative kiss of her own, her hand coming up to rest on his shoulder. When they parted, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the creek," he admitted. "I've been wanting you to," Harriet confessed, feeling bold in the darkness. Caleb chuckled, the sound warming her more than any blanket could. "Then I wish I hadn't waited." Over the following weeks, As summer gave way to early autumn, Harriet and Caleb's relationship deepened. He taught her to ride with increasing confidence, and she helped him gentle the most difficult horses, her patience proving as effective as his expertise. Elaine watched their growing closeness with obvious approval, often finding reasons to leave them alone together. The ranch hands teased Caleb good-naturedly, though never within Harriet's hearing. One crisp September morning, Caleb suggested they ride to a spot he wanted to show her, high on a ridge overlooking the valley. The maples and aspens were beginning to turn, splashing the landscape with gold and crimson. "It's breathtaking," Harriet said as they dismounted at the viewpoint. "My father proposed to my mother here," Caleb said, taking her hand. "Said he wanted to give her the whole valley." Harriet's pulse quickened at the implication. Did he, in a way? The ranch was much smaller then, just the house and barn and about 50 acres. Over the years, they built it into what it is now, together. Caleb turned to face her. "Harriet, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, and I know that when you came here the last thing on your mind was finding a husband." "Caleb," Harriet began, but he gently placed a finger on her lips. "Let me finish before I lose my nerve," he said with a crooked smile. "The day I saw you on that auction block, something pulled me there, something I couldn't explain. Now I think I understand. It wasn't just about doing the right thing. It was about finding the right person, even if I didn't know it then." He took both her hands in his. "I love you, Harriet Decker. Your kindness, your courage, your gentle strength. I love the way you hum when you're kneading bread, and the way you talk to the horses like they understand every word. I love that you stand your ground when it matters and yield when it's wise. I can't imagine my life without you in it now." Tears blurred Harriet's vision as Caleb dropped to one knee before her. "Will you marry me? Not because I rescued you or because you feel you owe me anything, but because you choose to. Because you might love me too." "I do love you," Harriet said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Caleb Grayson. Yes, I'll marry you." Caleb's face lit with joy as he rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "It was my mother's," he explained, withdrawing a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect pearl. "She gave it to me last week, said she'd been saving it for the right girl." As he slid the ring onto her finger, Harriet felt a profound sense of homecoming. From orphan child to servant to auction item to beloved fiancé, her journey had been long and often painful. But standing here with Caleb, she knew she had finally found where she belonged. They were married on a golden October afternoon in the town church, with Elaine beaming proudly from the front pew. Pete served as best man, and to everyone's surprise, Sheriff Davis and his wife attended, bringing a fine handcrafted quilt as a wedding gift. The judge who had sentenced Vernon Farley to 8 months in the territorial prison performed the ceremony, his sonorous voice filling the small church as Caleb and Harriet exchanged their vows. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," he concluded, and the gathered friends and neighbors erupted in applause as Caleb kissed his bride. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the trees. There was music and dancing, good food and better company. Harriet, in a cream-colored dress that Elaine had helped her make, felt beautiful for perhaps the first time in her life, especially when she caught Caleb looking at her with undisguised adoration. As the festivities wound down and guests began to depart, Elaine approached the newlyweds with a mysterious smile. "I have a wedding gift for you both," she announced, handing Caleb an envelope. Inside was a deed transferring ownership of the ranch's north section and the small cabin there to Caleb and Harriet Grayson. "Ma, this is too much," Caleb protested. Elaine shook her head. "It's just right. Every couple needs their own space to start a life together. Besides, that cabin's been empty since your father's foreman retired 5 years ago. It needs life in it again." "Thank you," Harriet said, embracing her mother-in-law tightly. "For everything. You make him happy," Elaine whispered. "That's all the thanks I need." The cabin, though dusty from disuse, was sound and cozy, with 2 bedrooms, a living area with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen with a good iron stove. In the days leading up to the wedding, Caleb and the ranch hands had repaired the roof and windows while Harriet and Elaine scrubbed and arranged furniture, transforming it into a proper home. That night, as husband and wife lay together in their new bedroom, Caleb traced gentle patterns on Harriet's bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," she assured him, nestling closer. "I never thought I could be this happy." "You deserve it," Caleb said. "You deserve everything good in this world." Harriet propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "So do you. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." Caleb pulled her down for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and understanding. "We'll make sure of it together." The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The winter after their wedding was harsh, with blizzards that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. But the family pulled together, and when spring finally arrived, it brought new life with it. Harriet was expecting their first child. Elaine was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, fussing over Harriet and insisting she rest more than Harriet thought necessary. "I'm perfectly capable of keeping house," Harriet protested when Elaine took over the bread-making one morning. "Of course you are," Elaine agreed. "But you're growing a new life, and that's work enough. Let me help." The baby, a boy they named Daniel after Caleb's father, was born on a warm September day in 1877, with the town doctor in attendance and Elaine serving as midwife. He had Caleb's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that stood straight up no matter how it was combed. Watching Caleb hold their son for the first time, Harriet felt her heart might burst with love. The big, strong man who trained wild horses was completely undone by the tiny bundle in his arms, whispering promises and pressing gentle kisses to the baby's forehead. "He's perfect," Caleb murmured, voice rough with emotion. "Like his mother." Harriet laughed softly. "Flatterer. Though I must say he does have your eyes." "Poor child," Caleb joked, though his pride was obvious. Life settled into a new rhythm with Daniel's arrival. The ranch prospered, their reputation for fine horses spreading beyond Nevada. Caleb hired 2 more hands to help with the expanding operation, and Harriet found herself hosting potential buyers from as far away as California and Colorado. Vernon Farley was released from prison after serving his sentence but left the territory shortly afterward. His ranch sold to pay his debts. The threat he had posed faded into memory, though Caleb remained vigilant about the safety of his growing family. When Daniel was 2, Harriet gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Sarah, who from their first day seemed determined to keep their parents on their toes. Where Daniel had been a calm, observant baby, the twins were bundles of energy, crawling and then walking earlier than the doctor thought possible. "They get that from you," Caleb teased Harriet one evening as they collapsed into bed after finally getting all 3 children to sleep. "That determination." "I seem to recall you being rather persistent yourself," Harriet retorted, snuggling against him, "especially when courting me." "Best persistence I ever showed," Caleb murmured, kissing her softly. Elaine was a doting grandmother, though her health began to fail when the twins were around 3 years old. A lingering cough turned into pneumonia one winter, and despite the doctor's best efforts, she never fully recovered her strength. "Don't look so worried," she told Harriet one day as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the children play. "I've had a good life. Raised a fine son, saw him happily married, met my grandchildren. Not everyone gets so much." "You still have plenty of living to do," Harriet insisted, taking her mother-in-law's frail hand. Lane smiled. "Maybe so. But if not, I'm content. You've made this family complete, Harriet. You gave Caleb what I always hoped he'd find someone to share his life with, truly share it." When Elaine passed peacefully in her sleep that autumn, the loss was keenly felt by the entire household. Caleb was devastated, though he tried to hide the depth of his grief, busying himself with ranch work and spending long hours in the stables. Harriet found him there late one night, sitting in the straw beside Midnight's stall, tears streaming unchecked down his face. Without a word, she sat beside him and took his hand. For a long while they sat in silence, the only sounds the occasional stamp of a hoof or soft nicker from the horses. "She was so proud of you," Harriet said finally. "Of the man you became, the father you are." "I hope so," Caleb's voice was hoarse. "Everything good in me came from her and Pa. And now it lives on in our children," Harriet reminded him. "Daniel has your mother's laugh, did you notice? And Emma has her way with animals." Caleb nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Sarah has her stubbornness." "That she does," Harriet agreed, relieved to see a glimmer of humor returning to his eyes. They sat a while longer, finding comfort in each other's presence and in the memories of the remarkable woman who had helped shape their lives. Life continued as it must. The children grew, the ranch flourished, and Harriet and Caleb's love deepened with each passing year. They had one more child, a boy they named James, born 5 years after the twins and doted on by his older siblings. Daniel, serious and thoughtful like his father, showed a talent for breeding and training horses from an early age. The twins were as different as sisters could be. Emma quiet and nurturing, Sarah bold and adventurous. James combined his mother's patience with his father's determination, a combination that served him well as he navigated life as the youngest child. In the spring of 1888, as they prepared to celebrate their 12th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Harriet with news that brought their journey full circle. "I've been invited to judge the horse show in Elko next month," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset. The original cabin had been expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, but they had kept the character of the place intact. "That's a great honor," Harriet said. "You should accept." "I thought we might all go," Caleb suggested. "Make a family trip of it. The children have never seen Elko, and it's been so long since we were there." Harriet hesitated. Elko held complicated memories for her, the humiliation of the auction, but also the moment that had led to her life with Caleb. "Are you sure?" she asked. "It's been 12 years. "Exactly," Caleb took her hand. 12 years since I found you, since our lives changed forever. I think it's fitting to return to show how far we've come." Put that way, the idea held appeal. "The children would enjoy the trip," she acknowledged. "And I admit, I'm curious to see how the town has changed." And so, a month later, the Grayson family arrived in Elko in their wagon, the children wide-eyed at the bustle of the growing town. They took rooms at the hotel, much grander than the establishment Harriet remembered from her brief stay years before. "Is this really where you and Papa met?" Sarah asked as they unpacked. "In a manner of speaking," Harriet replied, exchanging a glance with Caleb. "Your mother was the most beautiful woman at a very important gathering," Caleb said, choosing his words carefully for young ears. "I knew the moment I saw her that I had to meet her." "Was it love at first sight?" Emma asked dreamily. "Not exactly," Harriet admitted, But sometimes love grows from unexpected beginnings. The next day, while Caleb was busy with the horse show, Harriet took the children to explore the town. Much had changed: new buildings, wider streets, more people, but the town square where the auction had been held remained standing there, watching her children chase each other around the bandstand that now occupied the center of the square. Harriet felt a profound sense of closure. The frightened, humiliated young woman who had stood on the auction block seemed like a different person now, separated by years of love, growth, and happiness. Mrs. Grayson. She turned at the unfamiliar voice to find an elderly man regarding her with a mixture of uncertainty and recognition. "Yes, I thought it was you. Forgive me for approaching you like this. My name is Howard Jenkins. I was at the auction years ago." Harriet tensed, instinctively glancing toward her children, but they were still playing out of earshot. "I remember," she said cautiously. Jenkins had been one of the men who'd refused to bid, who'd looked away in embarrassment. "I've always regretted my cowardice that day," the old man said, his voice low. "Not bidding wasn't enough. I should have spoken up, should have stopped that travesty. Your husband was the only one with the courage to act." Harriet was speechless at this unexpected apology. "I just wanted you to know," Jenkins continued, "that many of us learned a lesson that day. The way Grayson stood up for you, it changed things in this town, made people think differently." "I thank you for telling me this, Mr. Jenkins." He tipped his hat and moved on, leaving Harriet thoughtful. She had never considered that her experience might have had ripple effects beyond her own life. When she told Caleb about the encounter that evening, he was quiet for a moment. "I never knew," he said finally. "I was too focused on getting you away from there to notice how others reacted." "It seems you did more than save one woman that day," Harriet said softly. "You made a statement." Caleb shook his head. "I just did what felt right." "You were the brave one, standing there with your head high despite everything." "We were both brave," Harriet decided. "And look what came of it." She gestured to their sleeping children, peaceful and secure in the hotel beds, unaware of how close their mother had come to a very different fate. The horse show was a success, with Caleb's expertise widely praised. On their last night in Elko, they attended a dinner for the judges and exhibitors, Harriet resplendent in a burgundy dress that complemented her figure without trying to disguise it. She had long since made peace with her body, helped by Caleb's unwavering appreciation. "You are beautiful," he whispered as they entered the hotel dining room. "Every eye in the room is on you." "Only yours matter," she replied, though she couldn't help but enjoy the admiring glances so different from the looks she had received in this same town 12 years earlier. As they prepared to leave Elko the next morning, Harriet took one last walk through the town square, alone this time. The early morning sun gilded the buildings, and shopkeepers were just beginning to open their doors for the day. Standing where the auction block had been, Harriet closed her eyes briefly, letting the memories wash over her, not to dwell on the pain, but to acknowledge how far she had come. "Are you all right?" She opened her eyes to find Caleb watching her, concern in his gaze. "Yes," she said with a genuine smile, "just making peace with the past." He took her hand, bringing it to his lips for a gentle kiss. "Ready to go home with you, always." As their wagon rolled out of Elko, their children chattering excitedly about the adventures they'd had, Harriet leaned against Caleb's shoulder, content. From the depths of humiliation on an auction block to this moment of perfect belonging, it had been an extraordinary journey, one she would never have imagined possible on that fateful day. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she replied. "If I hadn't been on that auction block, you wouldn't have found me." "I'd have found you somehow," Caleb said with certainty. Some things are meant to be. And as the town faded into the distance behind them and home waited ahead, Harriet knew he was right. Some things were indeed meant to be their love most of all. 20 years after that auction, on a warm summer evening in 1896, Harriet and Caleb Grayson sat on the porch of their expanded homestead, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Daniel, now a respected horse breeder in his own right, had married a sweet girl from Carson City and given them 2 grandsons. Emma was engaged to a young doctor who had recently set up practice nearby. Sarah, ever the adventurer, had just returned from 2 years teaching in San Francisco, full of stories and new ideas. James, their youngest at 18, was preparing to attend college in the fall, the first in the family to do so. "Did you ever imagine this?" Caleb asked, his hand finding Harriet's as it had countless times over the years. His hair was silver now, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his gaze when it rested on her held the same warmth it always had. "Not in my wildest dreams," Harriet admitted. At 42, she was still a substantial woman, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her worth went far beyond physical appearance. 20 years ago, I thought my life was over, and instead, it was just beginning." Caleb squeezed her hand. "When I said you're coming home that day, I had no idea what home would become for us." Harriet leaned her head on his shoulder, watching as their youngest grandson chased a butterfly across the lawn, his delighted laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "The best kind of home," she said softly. "One built on love, acceptance, and second chances." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Harriet felt a profound gratitude for the life they had created together. From that moment of deepest despair on an auction block in Elko to this peaceful evening surrounded by family, their journey had been unexpected and beautiful. "I love you, Caleb Grayson," she said, turning to press a kiss to his weathered cheek. "Today and always." "And I love you, Harriet Grayson," he replied, his voice as steady and true as it had been when he'd first bid for her freedom all those years ago. "More than yesterday, less than tomorrow." In the distance, a horse nickered the descendant of midnight, still the pride of their breeding stock, and their grandchildren's laughter mingled with the evening birdsong. This was their legacy. Not just the ranch or the horses or even their children, but the love that had transformed 2 lives and rippled outward, touching everyone around them. For Harriet, who had once stood alone and afraid on an auction block, there could be no greater triumph, no more perfect happiness than this simple truth: she was home, she was loved, and she always would be.